Hello, and I'm Ross Broadstock from Britain's Hidden History, and I talk to you about the book The Trojan War 650 BC, because we've got some very exciting news. Getting hold of these has been like gold dust for years and years and years, and we're going to get it reprinted. New cover, which you'll see on the website. If you go to BritainsHiddenHistory.com or Cymroglyphics.com, this isn't the new cover. This is just something I do, little tip, with my paperbacks that I use a lot. I don't want them to get battered. Put a card in there. There's like an extra cover. Anyway, I want to go to this book. It's fantastic. This really is, I would say, one of the great books written for decades and decades. If this book had been written by some sort of mainstream, if you like, or a sort of establishment type academics from a big university with a big publishing house, the writers of this, the authors of this, would have been receiving countless awards for history, language, science. I mean, it's the contents. It's impossible to really exaggerate how much is in here. There's so much covered, and it's just a phenomenal book. It's almost 500 pages, and as well as all the Trojan War stuff, which I'll get onto in a second, I find it easier to look through some of the list of illustrations. Gives a good idea. We've also got, see, some of the controversial points of this. One of the problems, I think, with this book being accepted at the time was it deals with things like ancient British writing and ancient British migrations and how they tie in with the Trojan War. Now, this is a very, very controversial subject because the British historical records and the British or the Welsh claims as well, or particularly the Welsh, it's the Cymry we're talking about, is that they migrated to Britain after the Trojan Wars, and it had been a few generations later. Now this becomes impossible when the Trojan War is given its sort of traditional, if you like, dating of round about 1250 BC or even earlier. You look at some of the historians, there's a range of dates, and the reason it's a range is they're pretty much, to be generous, they're calculations. They're based on a theory that was put forward a couple of thousand years ago by some Greek historians, and the idea was they had a list of what they considered to be the Spartan kings, and they could trace those back, so they allowed for up to 30 years per generation, and then they ran it back and said therefore it must be at this date. And it does seem to be part of a campaign to have added to the antiquity of Greece and make the country and its history seem older. And there was scandal at the time because there were famous families on both sides of the war who you had Romans who claimed that their ancestors had fought at Troy and they were descended from Aeneas and his journeys, and they had family trees that could show how far back it went. And suddenly there's this massive gap. They're saying, well, you're missing 600 years of generations. And then the other side of it is you've got the writings of Homer, and the idea is there that the Greeks invented writing or introduced to writing at around about 1250 BC or even 1400 BC, but then they didn't write anything for 600 years, or we can't find anything. And also that these Trojan War stories were, for 600 years or so, were kept going by an oral tradition of what happened. And then you have this, and then Homer suddenly decides to write everything down 600 years after the event. And this is why you get these problems with anachronisms, where there's things out of time, where they talked about the weapons and the tactics and saying this is from the wrong era. Well, it's only the wrong era if you're trying to cast this war way back to 1250. Once you move everything forward to 650, and you can see the evidence used in this book to show very convincingly why it was that era, everything starts to fall together. Suddenly you have Homer having written his stories, it's probably about the 630s it's estimated. Well, that's within a living generation of the events. You have first-hand eyewitness accounts. And as it goes through in here, he was not the only person who wrote about this. There were various other playwrights, there were plays written, there were dramas written at the time concerning activities in the Trojan War. And they're from different sources, and they all come from the same sort of era, and none earlier. So there's lots and lots of evidence supporting this theory, and what it does, and why it's such a bombshell, and why I think this book really gets suppressed, is that it really answers many of the riddles. Like as far back as Sir Isaac Newton it's been known that Egyptian dating is a complete mess. I think it was Gardner from a British museum who said our knowledge of Egyptian history is nothing more than a collection of rags and tatters. And that about sums it up, because the person Manetho, who was supposed to have written an account of all the kings of Egypt, and scraps of his work were found a long time after, and he wrote a long time after, but somehow this has been sort of sanctified as amazing evidence. And what is very strange is this kind of deification process of academics from the early 1800s. It seems their work is somehow sacrosanct. And they try to piece this together and made a long chain of rulers and pieced together an entire history of Egypt. And of course they come up with dynasties, and then you end up with gaps, the intermediate times. You get archaism, which is a weird concept, where after hundreds of years the people in Egypt decided to try and reflect the former glory and all dress like people did hundreds of years ago, do art like it and do everything like it. Whereas what you've really got is dynasties duplicated, of course, and the same story being told often with different names. You know, rulers have many different names, and they pick up. So you get the same story duplicated, you get gaps appearing, and it's caused chaos and pandemonium. But the difficulty is that some very, very clever people have built careers on sorting out this chaos and explaining things like the 600-year gap that appears in the records, which leads to this concept of an ancient dark ages. And then you get a whole series of lectures to say what caused it, you know, were there volcanoes, or was there a breakdown in trade? Then the mysterious sea people, who Wilson and Blackett also explain exactly who they are. Nothing mysterious about them, and they're not sea people, and it tells you in the hieroglyphs who they were, who they fought for, and why they're on the one side at the beginning of the wars and at the other side at the end of the wars. It all makes perfect sense. But this can't be accepted by the mainstream academics, because if you've made a whole career talking about the 600-year dark ages, and someone comes along, like Wilson and Blackett did with their Moses book, and say, well, there was no 600 years dark ages, it's just a mistake in the way you put the chronology together of ancient Egypt. And if you look in here as well, they explain which dynasties are duplicated, how to move them around, and a correct order of events, and everything goes together. So you've got those frustrated archaeologists in Turkey, and they write these exasperated letters, and you can feel their frustration. They can't say this is nonsense, but what they do say is like, oh, we're at a loss, we can't find anything for a whole 600-year period. You know, there's not a pot, there's not a vase, there's nothing. That's because that 600 years did not exist. If the events of 650 are moved to 1250, you've got a 600-year gap. And someone else I've been reading lately is Fomenko and his books on new chronology, and I'm going to be doing some reviews and discussion about that as well. Very similar techniques in many ways in trying to establish the correct chronology and putting things in order. Remove the duplications, and suddenly you find history is a lot shorter than you think it is. And the other interesting point with this as well is the assumption that everything in Egypt is Egyptian. Whereas what you go through in the book and explain how, and with Moses' book, more about this subject really, how Syrians came in, and Persians came in, and Romans came in, and Greeks came in. So actually it's foreign influences in a lot of this stuff. And yet return to this book, because it is a massive subject. And again, it talks about how to read hieroglyphs, and it's using ancient Assyrian language, which is very similar to modern Welsh, or particularly Old Welsh a few hundred years ago, and you can read it, and it's not difficult. I wrote my book, Cameroglyphics, all about that very subject, and you can see a bit more of an overview here. And then we go through some of the stela, and also there's bonuses in here. Where did you start on this book? It's like 4 books put together, okay? So you got how to read hieroglyphs, and then we've got a lot of the ancient British stuff, about ancient British writing, how that works, which of course is difficult for people. And then you've got some of the ancient British objects, which are actually British, and have been misstated and claimed as Anglo-Saxon. So again, another taboo is broken, more problems. Things like the Franks casket, how to properly understand it, Sutton Hoo. And then you've got more evidence for the migrations, where we've got the labyrinths that you see in Pompeii, Etruria, Tintagel, and in Italy, and then in Wales you see this same style, and this is a plotting of the route all the way back to Troy. So through all that side of it, and then we've got a little bit more then follow-up work from Moses, but also you can pick it up from here if you haven't read that book, is looking at who was who in the eras of Nebuchadnezzar, Ramses II, then go through the banquet scenes and translating stuff. It's absolutely fantastic. And of course the headline, if you like, I mean, there's already 2 or 3 books worth of amazing discoveries and information before we even get to the actual parts about the Trojan War itself. And this is really amazing, and it all makes sense suddenly. Once the genius of these people just pick it apart and actually read the evidence, not go in with a pre-concept or an idea of what you're looking for or just trying to do comparative means. Actually read it and see where that takes you and follow the evidence. And it's dreadful, the situation we've ended up in, whereby someone comes along with a new idea or a different way of looking at something or new evidence and brings it forward in a totally, reasonable and logical way, and the reaction is just appalling. That's all I have to say that. I have to say that. The way these people have been persecuted, the way people like Velikovsky were persecuted for bringing forward things that academics didn't want to hear. Now, the whole thing about the scientific process is that you constantly question and reevaluate. That's what it's all about. You have a hypothesis, you put it up there, you review it, it becomes a sort of the latest version is all I would say. I would never say really solve any of these problems. This has got more work to do on it. Totally open. And if you go through some of the early works of Wilson and Blackett, they've changed their views on things. New evidence has come along. People have said to them, hey, that doesn't quite work, or have you considered this? Or they find something and you change your position. That's the scientific method. This idea that we've now reached everything in history, it's fixed, We can argue about details, but no, the basic chronology and the things about things like this absolute ridiculous idea that the British can't possibly have been in the migration. You can't even look at it, to even... And what amazes me is the anger, the vehemence it generates. I mean, I know from my own experiences where I go on to Facebook and things and try to really, really go out of my way to politely suggest other possibilities and to look at this new evidence and have they considered the following, and some of the language in that is just mind-blowing. I mean, it's and I don't understand how people become so angry. I don't know if they're threatened or something, but the level of aggression is quite disturbing, really, because once you get to the stage where things can't be questioned and there is a one accepted mantra or canon of information and that's it, you are leaving science. You're into the realm then of faith. That's faith. When you can't question anymore and when things can't be discussed, that's faith. That's not about science anymore. That's not about historical research. And I think people should really bear that in mind and really look at this, because this could revolutionise all of it. And the old saying is that science changes, one coffin at a time. And I think there's Planck said, the physicist, that in his experience, you never change the mind of anybody in the academic world. You have to wait for the new generation to come through that's hopefully better informed or has different ideas, and they can do it because people become wedded to ideas. So I'm digressing from the book here a second, because these books, like the Moses book, Moses and Hieroglyphs, and this Trojan War book, they are massively important, and they deal with huge subjects, and they are really well researched and really well supported with evidence, and everything fits together. You don't need your dark ages, you don't need to see people. There's no longer archaeologists in Turkey wondering why there's a 600-year gap. The other thing I'm going to be talking on in more videos soon, the way in which dating, the so-called science of dating, is manipulated, it's outrageous. You want to see what goes on with carbon dating, and dendrochronology, and sedimentary dating, and how those results are manipulated. And that's going to be coming up soon, so please look out for that. So let's give some ideas. You've got to read the book, really. But with the Trojan War, you're really talking about here is people are sometimes referred to as Ramses I. That's Agamemnon. And set one is Menelaus, and Homer's Iliad, particularly the Iliad, of the Odyssey, sorry. That you can see the journey there. If you read the Odyssey, the first part of it is very clear, and the end of it, that these people like Menelaus are based in Egypt, in the Delta region of Egypt. He says it very clearly. That's where they are. And if you look at some of the mummies that have been found from what is called the 19th dynasty, you'll see red-haired mummies. They are white-skinned. This is Aryan, European mummies. They're not Egyptian just because they're found in Egypt, you know? It's like, why would you find a statue of Queen Victoria in India and Indonesia or somewhere? Because the British Empire was. And this Trojan War was very much a sideshow. The main war was, you got this were the Hittites and the Assyrians battling it out. And this is like a diversion, Troy. Because Egypt's nearer to us, and they've got these wonderful pyramids, and it's the first place Europeans really looked at, it's assumed this is the centre of civilization. No. They were part of other empires. Look at Egyptian history. Assyrians, about 2000 BC. Then we got the Persians came along, and the Greeks came along, and the Romans came along. It's been almost the British came along. It's almost a perpetual breadbasket. So that makes it very unpopular then, of course, for politically for Egyptian governments and the people looking after the pyramids and the artifacts. They don't want to be told that all their great achievements, their language and their buildings were done by foreign powers. But it doesn't make it, just because something's unpopular, as Alan Wilson always says, it's because unpopular doesn't make it untrue, okay? So we can look through all that's explained. What else we got then? There's some more stuff at the end. Oh yeah, the question then, so who are the Greeks and what were they doing there? Well, this ties into the politics of the Trojan War, which is this idea, they're all upset because Paris walked away with someone's missus, you know? No. It's much more to it than that. You can place who Helen was, actually two possible contenders. One was the wife of the dying pharaoh, one was the mother. Either way, he dies, no male heir. So whoever can marry the queen becomes known as Helen. I'll explain why she's called Helen as well. That person wins the marbles. They become the next pharaoh of Egypt, because up until now they've got minor, lesser kingdoms in the Delta region. So that's what the stakes are up for grabs. So that's why everyone wants to, because it's quite a crucial piece on the big overall chessboard to have Egypt, and the breadbasket and resources and everything else from there. So that's what they're playing for. That's what's up for grabs. It's their succession to the Egyptian throne. So all in all, it's just quite remarkable, and I can't highlight this high enough, and I said that's why I'm going to get it reprinted, redesign the cover so you can see it's the new one. Actually drop the word there, just Trojan War makes it easy to find on searches, but apart from that, all the words are the same. Just updated the pictures, put some new digital pictures in, and please, it's got like the connections with the fall of Troy. It's in the Bible. You got to do the connections with Tarshish, and the dating, it comes from, I think it's about 6 different directions altogether, all different sources and different histories and geological evidence, archaeological evidence, and how everything comes together at this magical date of 650 BC. So there we are. I was that's what I got a bit carried away there today, didn't I? But that's what comes when you go to a subject like this, which is, it's so mind-blowingly amazing, and it's so difficult to get some serious attention from the serious academia, and I wish they would just engage with an open mind and open heart. And if you find problems with the evidence or the logic or anything that's incorrect, then great, we can discuss it. Even the whole thing could get thrown out. But I tell you what, I've been looking through their work for a few years now, and I can't find those holes. So if you do, and you find the gaps, then let me know. Please do. But first of all, you need to check the evidence. So thank you very much. And like I said, more videos coming up, particularly on dating. I'm really going to get into that one. Some sacred cows are really going to get hoofed. Can you hoof the cows or cow hoof you? Anyway, until the next time, thank you for watching. Hello. Thanks, cameraman.